Good afternoon. Oh, good. The mic works. So I appreciate everyone who waited out in line. I'm so glad you guys got a chance to come in here. Here's the shocker. This is a group exercise. So to my two friends in the back row, unless you want to stay there, that's okay. But we're going to be working in groups of 4 through case studies. And so we already have seated in groups of 4 here, and then we'll be turning around up here to do some of those case studies. So if you're sitting next to anyone you really don't like, now's the time to tell them, so you could leave.
It's too late once you discover that.
Yeah, exactly. So anyone that's standing up now, no, we kind of know. And then we're going to get started. I'm waiting to kind of get a signal to see if other people are going to come in, to let them see that or not, because the registrations, this room was completely full. And then lunch happens, and life happens, and things happen. And so we have all that came back from here. So appreciate you guys coming in for this as well. This is scheduled to go to 3:45. Sometimes it does go that long, depending on how much we get into it, but it looks like we're hitting maybe 30 people, 20 people, so it might actually be able to go a little bit quicker.
But we are the last session of the day, so I say we push to like 5.
Overachievers, everyone here as overachievers. But once I kind of get the signal that it's closed down and the door closes, we'll get started. I figure you guys have done this in the other sessions, but I'm always kind of curious. Who here came from maybe outside the United States? Let's see who came from. Holy cow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where did you come from? From Chile. He had the Global Congress down there. Oh no, the LATAM Congress just last year. So, and Gabriel on the board from Chile. Yes. He's fantastic. Oh, thank you. And did you raise your hand as well? Where are you from? From where?
London.
From London. And excellent, thank you. And I think we actually have a Congress coming up there, like an EMEA summit next year. Who else had their hand up? Where are you from?
Canada, just across the street.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
No offense to our neighbors to the north.
Right.
And from where? Jamaica. Awesome. Anyone else on this side? Did I see any more international hands? And sir, did you have your hand? Where are you from?
St. Kitts in the Caribbean.
From where?
Kitts in the Caribbean.
In the Caribbean. So we've got St. Kitts, Jamaica. I think Chile wins for longest distance traveled. So, did I get that right? Chile or London? I think Chile is a little bit further. Yeah, I didn't say that. I didn't say. Yeah, something going on with metro passes right now, and yeah. So it's I know it's a hard trip to come up here too. So appreciate you coming and joining. So my name's Earl Crane. I'm going to be your co-presenter today, along with Joel Benge. So I've known Joel for 10 years?
10 plus, yeah.
10 years, and we were surprised by another colleague of ours, Roger C. Holzer, who's a volunteer here as well in the back, and he'll be helping us out as well. So I got to know Joel and Roger back when I was at Homeland Security, where I was the director for cyber strategy. I was also the chief security architect, and then from there went to the White House for a couple years, and then into financial sector. And somehow during that time, I got sucked into teaching at Carnegie Mellon. And so I've been teaching there for about 20 years in various information security courses. One, when we very first started it, it was the Hacking Exposed classes. I started off with Foundstone. We were the folks that wrote the Hacking Exposed series, and we took that and made an academic version of it. And so we're teaching that at Carnegie Mellon. I went to other schools and then teaching incident response, and then as I was in DC, got into policy, and now it's been in advanced cyber risk management. So currently I teach a class there in their Executive CISO Institute, where we take cohorts of CISOs and aspiring CISOs through a 6-month program and teach them various skills for being a CISO. And one of them is cyber risk management and cyber security metrics and some of those other components. What we're doing today is a compressed version of that day-long class with just the fun parts. We're not going to get into a lot of the academic theory or a lot of the other concepts, but we're going to play a game, which is part of one of the things that we include there in the breakup for that. And the background of this game is based off of my doctoral work, which I did at George Washington while I was over at the White House, where we had the problem of so many different assets we're needing to protect in our environment. How can we wrap our heads around that? And we realized we wanted to take a different approach to risk management. And Joel is the genius that came up with the idea here that said, well, this concept is really complex. What if there was a card game?
So PhD, card game designer. So that's what we're going to do today. I win. We'll
So
see.
go ahead and introduce yourself. That's the handoff.
So my name's Joel Benj. I'm a senior brand strategist. I'm a marketer, right? But I spent years in cybersecurity and puppets and working for Nickelodeon and all kinds of mishmash. And it just ended up working for this gentleman at Homeland Security for 7 years, where we partnered up and sort of threw this idea together. I now work for this company called ADG, where what we actually do is partner with the intelligence community, DoD, military, and cybersecurity companies to make their really complicated products simple. Card games. Thank you. It's not easy. So what we're going to do today is we're going to step through, we're going to play a game, we're going to step through a doomsday simulation. Just like every famous doomsday movie I can think of, Men in Black with Will Smith, Independence Day with Will Smith, not Liam Hemsworth, you have three things. You have a change in position, you have a change of mindset, and then you have a change in conversation. So what we're going to do is we're going to step through these 3 steps. We're going to talk about some history, we're going to talk about some new technologies, we're going to get eventually to playing the game, and when you're out of here today, you're going to have these 3 things in mind, and you're going to be able to take them immediately back to your places of work, back to your organizations, and say, hey boss, let's play a game.
So one of the starting points of this, right, is, and we call this change your position, is we get stuck in these ruts. We get stuck in these roles. Sometimes we're put there because of the guardrails that are put down in our organization. Sometimes we're mentally just there because of our day-to-day grind. And so the value in looking at this from a gamified perspective is it makes us look at it in a different context. And so new things, and that's what we're looking for, are things. New things pop up that we didn't think about before. New things come up that we hadn't identified, and that's called accidental learning. So we are accidentally going to discover new types of risk scenarios that we could be exposed to, and that fundamental shift starts to change the way that we play the game. So when Joel and Roger and I were back at Homeland Security, the first CISO at DHS, his name was Bob West, and he would tell this story about how when we were first standing up the department and we had the Secret Service had one way that they were doing things and their security appetite, their security posture. We had TSA, which was really new kid on the block, as they were still figuring out just how to operate. And we had the Coast Guard, which is the oldest federal service, originally started as the Revenue Cutter Service in 1792. So you have this collision of personalities and a collision of cultures. And we now had to operate as a department. So we had to change the game. We had to figure out how this new entity called Homeland Security that hadn't existed before would happen. And so we used that opportunity to start driving what we now call the Homeland Security enterprise and the shift in Homeland Security culture. The way the story goes, or as Bob would share it, is that if you ever watch kids play soccer, you know, I have little kids and I see heads nodding, so you see little kids, and what do? They swarm the ball, thank you, yes. Everyone, bunch ball, right? They all run after the ball. And it's not till they get a little bit older and we get a little bit more governance in place and we start having policies in place called, you know, rules, and we start playing positions. Now everyone gets different duties, different jobs. You're gonna be goalie, you're gonna be forward, and they start playing more as a team. And so we had to shift the position and change from swarm the ball to position play. And by breaking out of that context, we're able to reset the pieces and start thinking about position play. That's what we did at Homeland, and say, okay, U.S. CERT, this is your role and the different agency components, and this is where the Secret Service plays and how they interface with the FBI. And getting those roles identified and codified was a lot of work. And so if you're in an agency or an organization that's transformational, or if you want to bring that transformation to it, you're going to have to shake it up a little bit first to get those new guardrails down. And this is a technique that you'll be able to use to do that from a cyber risk scenario. So one of the things I want you to walk away with today is going to be thinking about your role in driving that dynamic change. And we're all security professionals here. You are somewhere along your journey as a cybersecurity professional. And in my mind, the journey looks something like this. So when we're first starting out, we're going to be very tactically focused. Early in our career, sometimes we enter in because we're a technical person, sometimes we enter because we're a policy person, we're a governance person, we're a privacy person. We have some reason why we're here, some specialty that's pulled us in, and that's where we start off on this journey. And so we take a very operational view to that. In this case, if you happen to be a cybersecurity operations manager, if you're coming in from the pen test world or the compliance world, you're focused on blocking and tackling, looking at the problem that's in front of you, on responding to incidents as they pop up. It's very first tier support from a SOC perspective, and that's the entry point that a lot of us showed up on. Well, as we gained experience, we got better, we gained capability, and we eventually move up and we start leading other people that need to do that same level of blocking and tackling, leading other people that become the ops managers. And this is where we start to look at pattern matching, pattern identification. We have the reporting is still backwards looking, but we can anticipate what some of that's going to look like. And we start to identify patterns where we can start classifying that and say, hey, these are the different types of incidents or the different types of issues. Those issues might be technical incidents. They might be policy gaps. They might be privacy considerations, right? So this isn't always dealing with just operational response, but it starts to fit in those areas. Then, as we get better as that security director, our responsibility increases. And so now we've led a team, we're specialists in our field, and that's usually where we start to enter into that role of the CISO. This is the aspiring CISO that said, you're operating well as that security director, we need you to run it for the organization. And so the fresh CISOs new into that role, very tactical. So their job is the first line, looking at incidents, identifying what those are, reporting, the response, containment, and this is where they're building in both the way that they report into executives and justifying the tools that they have in that environment. Again, in that new role, they gain more experience, their capability increases, till they start to hit the strategic CISO. And this is the point where you start being able to look at the business impact. What will happen if I don't take a particular action, and starting to project the different types of incidents of what we would have and how we can then mediate those. So what you'll see is a career progression, looks like this. And by seeing the path and seeing where you want to get to and where you are, now we can short circuit it. And so what we want to try to do, and this is part of both the Carnegie Mellon class, but also why you're here at this conference today, is you're moving along that path and you're saying, well, how can I get to that? If that's the position you want to go to, how can I get to more of that strategic thinking? So a brief poll, and if you don't want to raise your hand, that's fine, because you are security people, right? Introverts, right? How many of you either started here or are here as the cyber ops manager? With a show of hands. So how many of you are at the security director role, or you passed in there along the way? We've got a few more in there. How many of you, you're at the tactical CISO position? And a few more. How many of you do you think you're hitting at that strategic CISO function? All right, well, you strategic folks are gonna give me a run for my money here, so, because you've seen this before. You've had to deal with this before. So this will be great to kind of, any kind of feedback with there as well. Who didn't raise their hand? Would any of you want to share maybe where you are along that journey? Because I think that's a helpful perspective to have.
I came into the field with zero experience, and
So awareness and training, though, I actually got one of my first clients years and years ago was California Edison, and helping build their awareness and training program, right? So back here, operationally, needing to think, how do I engage with people from an awareness perspective and communicating those elements? So you're still in the life cycle, right? And as you go through that journey into as a chief cyber learning officer, right? So appreciate that, thank you. So that's what we're trying to get to, both briefly out of today, but also from the why you are here at this conference in the first place. So I mentioned in that conversation we had first line, and what I didn't mention was second line, and it's this concept of 3 lines of defense. Have any of you before heard of this idea of 3 lines of defense? Would any of you want to share, and there's no right or wrong, right? What 3 lines of defense, what is that? So we've got the experienced CISO, right, strategic CISO, and we've got the ISC squared volunteer, which are both equally qualified. Who wants to share? Okay, Robert.
My understanding is the first line is typically your operations as opposed to the process. Second line is typically your policy risk folks, and the third line is our internal line.
You get up here and teach us.
All right,
Done.
we're done.
Exactly right, exactly right. Now, how many of you haven't heard of 3 lines of defense before? Awesome, you learned something today. So the 3 lines of defense model came out from the Dodd-Frank Act. It was specifically directed because of the financial crisis in 2008 that we realized we had to start separating out the people that were taking risk from the people that had the oversight of risk that was being exposed to the rest of the organization.
And not security risk, we're talking about banking.
Yeah, this is investments. 3 lines of defense started in the banking and the investment world. And then a couple of smart security people, I really don't know who, but I'm glad that they did say, hey, that could really be helpful for the problems that we have as well.
Or more likely than that, the banking risk officers went to the security guys and said, 3 lines of defense, and they were like, firewalls, routers.
Right, exactly. Because when this first came into the conversation, it was around 2010 when we started having a conversation from the security perspective. It was thinking first tier, second tier in the SOC. And we're like, no, this isn't first tier and second tier in the SOC. Those are all first line operations. So now it's evolved, and it's a good model to use in information security, particularly if you're along that security path, and to know where what you're pushing forward fits into that. So first line, these are the folks that own the risk. These are the people that have the hands on the keyboard. The banking world, these are the cash handlers, these people making financial decisions. In the security world, it's the people that are touching routers and firewalls, dealing with incident response, tactical, hands-on, that's your cyber ops manager. They're the ones that really own the risk when you're pushing out a system, an information system, and securing it as well. So they're the ones where that accountability sits. And the responsibility side of it. But then we injected this second line, which is the oversight. And the second line takes a holistic view of risk for the organization, looking at the policies that are in place, the risk management frameworks that are in place, the different risks that those individual business units are taking and what they're exposed to, and asking, is it fitting within our risk appetite? Is it taking on more risk than we're comfortable with? That's where the second line comes in, and these are a lot of your tactical CISOs and even your strategic CISOs. Some will say that they sit at both the first and the second line. Some are purely at the second line, and those are usually ones that report under the chief risk officer, and then they will have the CIO or someone doing IT management that would still be part of the first line owner, and so the second line is pushing policies and doing risk oversight functions over that third line. So you get a division of duties, the separation of duties and the division of labor between that first and that second line, and then we bring in the third line, which is your audit function. That can be both your internal audit in government, that can be your IG or GAO. In larger scale, you consider that's Congress, but this is an independent body that can reach into the first and the second line to look at how the risk management function is operating. And usually that third line also has a direct report into the chief risk officer, the board of directors, the risk committee, to bring that independent oversight function. So it's a completely different model. It's a new model to the one that's a operational CISO, where all of the cyber risk and cybersecurity function of the organization falls on his or her head. And so that's one of the big shifts that's still going, depending on maturity within the industry.
All right, so now we're going to talk about how these different lines of defense do their jobs and the types of tools they use. And the first thing we're going to show is obviously first line, those risk owners. Those are those tactical tools. Those are the tools that generate data. Those are the tools that touch the data. And if you go to any cybersecurity conference, that is 98% of every table that you'll see at a Black Hat, an RSA, or something like that. All those tools that actually do things. At the second line, we have people, tabletop assessments, and folks sticking their finger in the air and thinking, well, this kind of feels maybe a good or bad, right? Right now, we're watching the tool ecosystem mature, and there's not a lot of automation. It's a lot of auditors, it's a lot of Excel spreadsheets, it's a lot of manual things. A lot of clipboards running around checking. And then again, at the top, you've got audit. These are the people who you do not want to surprise. You want to always give them a heads up. And the challenge that we find is all the data is sitting down here, and it gets sort of munged up here, but at scale, it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to do these second line risk operations and the modeling and stuff that needs to happen because there's not a lot of connection, right? There's not a lot of automation that can pull down into these, look at across the entire ecosystem and the entire environment and pull the data up and then make sense of it, right? There's a couple tools out there that are budding right now that are starting to handle this in different ways. Yeah.
You said eco what?
The ecosystem,
And
like a tool ecosystem.
But is it a tool that is coming, or are you just talking about how the ecosystem actually works?
Just how the tool ecosystem works. There's a lot of still compliant. So a lot of people will look at that second line and they think we're still in the compliance space. Compliance it informs it. So there's a lot of tools that are almost there, but they're not then taking what we're going to show you today, which is how you can take it into those, asking the questions that the second line needs to answer, right? So there are some, but they're not answering those questions. Yeah.
Can you tell us about the risk guidance for that? Because it's a bit alien to me that they would provide guidance, but they're there to provide verification or compliance.
If we go back to the that one.
It's assurance. Yeah, that's right.
So they're correct. They would be doing some verification, but they're also the ones who are talking outside their organization. So if you have your auditors or your IGs in the government space, they're talking to other IGs. So they're looking a little bit broader, maybe across, I don't want to use the word ecosystem again, but maybe market space, and they're looking at a larger macro thing. But we're seeing this evolving also. But you're right, traditionally, if you think about that from an audit perspective, the auditors, they're going to be doing the verification, the validation. But they're also the ones that report usually directly to the top. So they're,
But to your point,
Findings, and that findings could be issued as guidance as well.
correct. Yeah.
that's right. So you have your independent audit function, which is going to do samples of different types of control samples, different types of assessments. They want to know that the second line function is operating and is effective. It's called a credible challenge, is what that audit, both an outside regulator and an internal auditor wants to provide a credible challenge to the risk management function at the second line and the operational function at the first line. And so that's why they're there just asking questions. To your point, who's picking the risk management framework? That's at the second line, because they're the ones that are responsible for the overall risk management of the organization. And it's the job of that third line to catch them if they screw up. So that's building that layered defense.
I would add the perspective on that risk ownership. I don't consider those folks to be risk ownership. I consider them to be control owners. They are the folks that implement the technical controls, at least in the perspective that I have. And so I think that that's really what they do. But they're not in a position within an organization to own or accept risk, right? That's done at a much higher level. So I would offer that those are actually control owners. And then the rest of that makes sense to me. But I wouldn't say that they're risk owners.
It's a great view, and it's going to be, so culture's different in every organization, and in yours, that could make perfect sense. I'll give you some examples. if you are in an organization where you are developing technology or delivering services, and those services have some critical line function to the business, the product owner or the director in charge of that division, they're the risk owner.
Yeah.
They're the one generating money for the company and value for the company. They're the ones that really own the risk. Because if the risk is if it doesn't work, right? That's that issue, right? So do they define the controls, or do they have a security team that defines those controls, or those kind of put on there? Because I'm sure we've all had this conversation before, is the product owner says, I want to get this out on the internet, I don't want it authenticated, I want everyone to be able to get access to it, and the security side, my head explodes. I was like, no, we need, like, who's coming to it? Have you checked it for vulnerability, et cetera? But then you say, look, we have this massive opportunity, we're willing to take the risk to put this insecure capability out there to be first to market. Well, guess what? That first line product owner is the one that owns that risk. And the job here is to say, make sure, okay, everybody's clear, this is the risk that you're taking. And that's the job at that second line, to say, you're getting a waiver from our usual policies, so if it all blows up, we've done the best we can to protect you, knowing that you're taking this risk on behalf of the organization. And if it doesn't work very well, the second line has already highlighted that. Yep. And so that's where you then have that risk conversation, because it is that risk reward. It's actually a great segue to the next slide, which is we covered first shifting our position, and now let's talk about shifting our mindset. And so in our mindset there, who's taking the risk? It's how big of a risk are you willing to take? So the mindset that I'd highlight for you is, instead of, for security professionals, changing from incident management, which is, I don't want this breach to happen, to change to impact management, which is, there are some things that are okay to happen. There are some risks we're willing to take. If putting this new system out there, I love that you brought this example up, could gain us $10 million in revenue because first to market, but the sensitivity of the data would be a $50,000 impact. There's no PII, for whatever reason, that's a risk we should take. Rather than the strict cybersecurity compliance mindset, which is, nope, you have to go through all these these tests and comply with these policies and all these restrictions, and that's what makes the program side's head explode. So when we think about what are you willing to risk? What's the amount of risk, and how can, as a security professional, you enable the business unit, the first line risk takers, the risk owners, why we're, many of us are in business in first place, to take appropriate risk. So part of shifting that mindset is what we want to get into by having a risk conversation rather than a compliance conversation. We've all heard compliance does not equal security, and we say that, it's a nice quip, and then at the same time, well, if you have no compliance, we know you're pretty well hosed. So, there's some value in that, right? But when we look at, take an example from Homeland Security, right? We knew that technology was changing away from servers and going to cloud. And that to try to bring government IT costs down, we wanted to make a shift to cloud computing. We didn't want to stay stuck in the server world. But our compliance guidelines, 853 is the controls guide that we use from NIST, wasn't structured to be able to use cloud systems, because it was very server client focused. And so we started this initiative called FedRAMP. And the FedRAMP program took those controls and said, okay, we're going to modify those controls so they can work in a cloud environment. And instead of it wholly the risk being owned by government, it's a shared responsibility model. The cloud service provider has to put some money up front so they can put some controls so that they can assert what they're doing, and then the agency side, or whoever's certifying it, has to trust that Microsoft and Amazon and other cloud service providers are actually doing what they're saying they're doing, so we can then inherit those controls and be able to go to market with that. It's a shift in the way that we thought about how an IT system should run, where we're trusting more from the third-party service provider, and it's not really the same as vendor risk management. It was a different beast. And so we had to shift our mindset about cloud computing and how we would provide security in that cloud environment. That's where the FedRAMP program came from, that I think's been rather successful. Not cheap, I never said that. rather successful in an onboarding path to bring cloud computing into government. And there's other programs like continuous monitoring within Homeland Security where we've done shifts in op tempo to try to make things more efficient. And I think that we can we even see that in the 3 lines of defense from the financial sector. So the idea here is shifting our mindset and to get out of this just being whack-a-mole, right? That's our traditional op response. We don't want this to be whack-a-mole. What we want to get this to instead is to get into a game of what-ifs. That's the mindset shift that we're going to go through with this card deck, is we want to say, what are the bad things that could happen? I'm going to let you push this. I'm going to use your example the whole time. I'm going to let you push this business unit out, this new service. What are the bad things that could happen? I don't care about, other than like legal implications, the compliance on one side or another will waive particular requirements so long as it's not going to impact us too much. So what are the bad things that could happen?
Pop quiz.
Extra points, though I don't know what points we have. Anyone that can identify this, for every battle, everywhere, always in your mind, imagine every possible series of events that are happening all at once. If you live that way, nothing will surprise you. And everything that happens will be something you've already seen before.
Philosophy students. Liberal arts. No?
What did you say?
Philosophy students. Liberal
Philosophy
arts.
students, yeah.
Television fans.
Any guesses?
Game of Thrones fans.
We've got a hand here. Have you seen this talk before?
No, I hit the slide too early.
Oh, dang it. All right, this is Baelish.
We don't have the 6 hours we usually teach this class in. We have to compress this.
Yeah. Lord Baelish, exactly. Of course,
how well did that work out for him? Right? He had seen this episode before. He should have kept it in mind. He should have known what was going to happen. Right? So what we want to talk about is the second line mindset, and it's actually bringing together the first and the third and figuring out what we can do to put them together. So this is how we like to talk about risk. Your risk managers or your audits, your second line functions, your higher level, they want to ask these questions, touchy-feely, philosophical questions. Am I comfortable? Am I within my appetite? How are we feeling today, right? And the first line folks, those ops managers are talking about key risk indicators. They're looking at data. They're like, if you could read this data that I'm looking at here, this thing has turned red. It's very important. We need to fix it. And the people up here are asking, what does that mean? Like, how should I feel about that from a business perspective? And so what we want to do is we want to knit these two together and close that gap with talking about impact to business, right? Because that's a little bit more aligned with that top line people. Like, how could this actually hurt? How could it hurt financially? How could this hurt from customer loyalty, which is financial? How could it relate to market position, which is financial? It's all financial. It's all dollars, right? But when you look at a firewall log or you look at incidents, how do you tie that to a dollar amount? Well, we're going to talk about today, we're going to focus mostly in the scenario level. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what could happen and how do we model out and how do we explore what could create those losses. So if we insert ourselves at any level in this model, we can get to any other ones by having a conversation, by asking these questions. So the model that we're going to talk about today, again, we're going to start with the scenario exposures. That's what this card modeling tool, it's not just a game, I'm going to upgrade myself a little bit, it's a tool. We're going to look at scenario exposures. It'll expose us to be able to talk about metrics and what kind of metrics we could collect. We'll discuss and we'll touch on impact, but then what we won't really have a chance to talk to today, but we'll leave you with some materials, will be about appetite. All right, and we'll show you how we knit all of these together. So I want to share a really quick story. We have a colleague in common who was the CIO at DTCC. Anybody familiar with the CISO, the DTCC, Depository Trust Clearing Corporation? Mark Clancy, yeah. Anybody ever trade stock? Financial instruments? They took the money and they took the stock and they did this, right? They clear billions and trillions of dollars a day. Talk about risk, right? So during the the Greek financial sovereign debt crisis. They were going up in front of the board. This was one of his first board meetings.
This was Mark.
Mark
Up in
Clancy.
front of the board. Mark was the CTO for a brief time at Emergynt, the company where we worked to building a lot of this model until he went over to be the CISO over at Sprint. But he's still an advisor for us.
So it was one of his first presentations, and he was following the financial people. And the financial people had these models, and they had these numbers, and they said, making these up, if Greece defaults on this debt, we stand an 83% chance of an $8 billion impact, but we can mitigate that by taking these steps, and that brings our chance down to 60%, and it's only $1 billion. And the board was like, that's fantastic. And then Mark went up there and he had a little stoplight chart and he said, well, when it comes to Russia, we're yellow. High, medium, low, right? He said it's like bringing a noodle to a gunfight. And that sometimes when we walk in there, if we're not prepared to have these conversations, that's where we can get to. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a game. We're going to make this very simple. This is my son. He helped to invent this game. He's right now enjoying Epcot. And on the right there, depending on your opinion of Kevin Mitnick, the world's most famous hacker, we have a representation, and this is Earl actually playing the beta version of the card game. What we did was we invented something that took a PhD thesis, everything that we've talked to up to this point, and made it simple enough for a 7-year-old to understand. But if you put it in the hands of somebody who knows what they're talking about and has a little bit of instinct, right, they can engage their gut, they can engage their intellect, and actually discover brand new things. So what we'll do, if you want to talk to us.
Kevin's comment was, oh, that's pretty sophisticated. And then the same question I'm going to ask
And he said, I'm late
all
for
of
my
you
party.
when we go through. What's that?
And he said, I'm late for my party. Get out of here.
Yeah. But the same question that we'll ask all of you when we go through the exercises is, could you see this happening? And very rarely have we found a scenario that builds out in the cards that we haven't seen before, or at least that we couldn't imagine actually happening. So how did we end up in this idea of building this type of, effectively, it's a threat modeling approach, but it's really based around loss scenarios. Well, if we kind of rewind in the history of information security, it's all been about asset protection, asset management. Put your valuables in the bank, identify your crown jewels, and lock those down. Problem is, we start putting stuff online, records get digital, and the number of assets that we need to protect explodes to the point that we can't really keep track of all of them in our traditional model. So we said, all right, well, people are going to go after those assets. All those assets happen to have vulnerabilities on them, so why don't we just put them all in a box and try to protect the vulnerabilities and close off vulnerabilities? So we're going to build that around those assets. So say, okay, we put it all in the safe, and is the safe secure, right? Can you pick the lock, et cetera? And that's fine until we get even more assets, and now we're needing to do all this vulnerability management. This was vulnerability scanning. This is like the late 90s, early 2000 when we're dealing with that headache. And then someone says, hey, guess what? These are not just words that we apply now that we didn't even use then, of hacktivists and script kiddies, and we did not have a concept on the civilian side that we discussed nation states, but then we realized that we could start to identify and classify different types of attackers and that they had different characteristics, and we could bring that intelligence that we realized from a threat-based perspective, because different attackers are humans, they have different motivations, and they're going to use different techniques to get access to the systems they want to accomplish their goals. And so, kind of set at that high level. And so we brought a threat perspective to our asset protection model. And so what we do in this game and in this model is we combine all three of those together. Once we start looking at threats, vulnerabilities, and assets, we have a scenario.
And then we add some stuff. So what we're going to do is, can I actually get a volunteer? Can I get somebody to come up and help me? Yeah, come on up here. Yeah, you're in the right spot. So if you'll just give me a moment, because I'm having a technical difficulty with the camera. Please work. There we go. It'll work in just a second. So what's your name?
Chris.
Chris. Joel, good to meet you.
Meet you.
And it is not active. All right. Well, anyway, we'll do it this way. So what we have here is
you play the game, I'll troubleshoot.
Yeah, you work on that. So we have a deck of cards. It's got 51 different cards in it, and there's different colors, right? So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to give you, I want you to just randomly select one of the blues. This is going to be our actor, And this is, in our scenario, what we're concerned about. And you can flip it over and look at it and tell me what it is.
Remote user.
Remote users. Anybody here concerned particularly about the moment you hear the word remote user, you pucker up a little bit. And you, oh, geez, right? It's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to skip over the greens and we're going to look at the targets. Now, what could a remote user potentially, maliciously, unintentionally, put at risk?
Sorry.
No worries.
Endpoint laptop.
Endpoint laptop. Look, let's do a different one. That's
Yeah.
way too easy. Just grab any of these.
Endpoint mobile phone.
That's too easy. 52 cards in it.
I thought this was going to be 52 card pickup.
A manager. Hey,
Manager.
this one is good. So we might be getting into a little bit of social situations here. How could a remote user impact a manager? Just grab the one on top.
Inadequate training.
Inadequate training. Okay. So let's think about this. Can anybody think of a situation, maybe it's happened in the past, where, I don't know what's going on there.
I'm just futzing around at this point. I don't know how to fix it.
You're distracting them too. Where a remote user has had some inadequate training or suffered from inadequate training and put a manager at risk, impacted the productivity of a manager. I see a couple heads nodding. You can imagine how this could happen. There was one thing we want to add to here, and this is the traditional confidentiality, integrity, availability. We're all familiar with this, right? This is what we're going to call our consequence. And I'm going to pick this one. I'm going to say it's unavailable. Mm-hmm. Right, so we have a remote user who has had poor training and has tied up his manager all day long, right? The manager's trying to help him out. He's knocked out. He's unavailable. Meanwhile, there's other fires going on. Hey, that's the other one. Yeah, he's unavailable. What we want to actually talk about is what is the impact? Where are we going to get hurt? Anybody here, you're all familiar with your risk register, your corporate risk register. You know what's on it, backwards and forwards. You have it tattooed on the back of your wrist. So you look at it every night and you go, I hope to God nothing happens to this situation. So let's say we could have an operational impact. We could have a strategic impact. Whoops, I got it. You got that one.
That's
Liquidity, a strategic impact. So basically what we're doing here is we're setting up a scenario. We found that there almost is not a combination of these cards here, 51 cards, 52 with the instructions, where you can't put together something that you have either seen before or you haven't seen before, but the moment you see it, you go, that would be bad. That could be terrible, right? And so what we're going to do is, and I'll futz with that
you'll have
while,
to futz with that. I haven't used
while
it
we're doing
before,
this.
so.
We're going to hand out these cards. Thank you very much. Awesome. And we've got some case studies. And what we're going to do is we're going to set as right as you get it
I
done.
futz sufficiently, like all things, right? If you don't know how to do it, just keep hitting buttons till it works. Right?
PhD and marketing guy. All right. Here we go.
Got it.
So this is what we just made there. I can probably turn the light off. Right, so what we're able to do is we're able to model out a scenario like this. Now, what happens if we swap one of these out? I'm just going to talk really briefly. What about an unauthorized user? My cards are here. It faces the corporate website and somehow gets into an endpoint workstation. I can see that we're now exposing a lot more, right? So we're not talking about taking up a manager's time. We're talking about potentially getting into more systems and these things spread. So what we'll do is, now where did you put my PowerPoint slide? You closed it. There we go. So what we're gonna do, this is the boring way to look at it, is if you just step through that. So the other thing that we're going to talk about when we pull these up, and we don't have cards for this because there are a million of them, but those would be the metrics. Like, we always get asked, well, this is all well and good, you've made up a bedtime story, but how could I keep an eye on that? How would I know whether this is likely to happen? Well, in this case, for a hacktivist group, I might be looking at Twitter chatter. I might have some threat intelligence feeds. I might be looking at a blacklist. I might just put a finger on a calendar. And as I get close to releasing my financial statements or I get close to tax season, I might just get a little bit nervous about that, right? So you might imagine this card starts to flash a little bit, starts to get a little bit more nervous about phishing. So our scenario that we modeled up here would be hacktivists taking advantage of a phishing vulnerability that results in a data leak of customer records triggering a legal and reputational loss, right? Very simple. I could do probably this in my sleep. You pick up the phone, you call up somebody, you get those numbers. You probably have those in a SIM. You have some. You might have to chase down some other ones. How well is my staff training? What's going on in DLP? But to do this at scale is what we're talking about, because then you go from something that's fun to something that's boring, and something that looks at this, which is not compelling, which is not something that you can put in front of your leadership or your board, because it just won't connect with them. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass out the cards. We're going to do some risk modeling for fun and profit. And if I can get our helpers, Roger and... Yep, both of y'all.
So we're going to pass out...
I worked with Roger for like 7 years. I'm sorry, I just met you this morning.
Actually, no.
You can pass these out, one to everybody.
Now, the hardest part of this is getting that shrink wrap off.
Yeah, it is. It does take some time. And just pass the rest back.
Now, to connect two pieces together for you, when you get a chance to open this up, how we pick these cards in here, you'll see on each one of those cards, they will either be actor, vulnerability, the target, or the consequence, and then underneath them, there will be these components of this ontology. So like in this case, we say threat actors, internal, untrusted, malicious. That would be a malicious, untrusted, internal actor. So with that ontology, which is one of the mechanisms we built to be able to create the system, you can create any type and categorize any type of actor or vulnerability or target. So the reason why we have only 4,000 scenarios in here is that's all that we could fit in with 52 cards. But in the model of this, they are 1,000 plus different objects, each one of these as an object, and that results in billions of possible scenarios.
And then just a different case study to each table.
Okay. I organized back there.
Oh, you did that.
We got this part.
What's that?
Yeah, we've got this part.
Yeah, we got this
as well.
Okay.
So
yeah, those are the guides for afterwards.
So everyone,
You guys are gonna
some
need
people
to
have them
wait.
open, some don't, right? Hey Joel, before you hand those out, I want to ask a quick question though. So,
It's going to take me a while.
and we've got them all sorted in stacks in the back too, so we don't have to hand them out from that deck.
Oh,
They're already
Why don't
all
you do that?
broken out. So we have 8 case studies. We're going to be working in groups of
San
4,
Francisco,
like I had mentioned.
Deloitte.
I want to mention what the
LabCorp.
companies are that are going to be using these case studies. These are the same case studies we use in the Carnegie Mellon program. If any of you either are in the same sector or know of those areas or even worked at any of these companies, you could either choose to be part of that group doing the case study, which would be really insightful, or you might want to not be part of it, depending on where you were. So we're going to be looking at Under Armour, Under Armour, Uber, Panera Bread, LabCorp, which is a medical diagnostic screening, FedEx, Deloitte, and the San Francisco Muni. That's BART Breach. And then IHG is the International Hotels Group. They're the ones that do like the Holiday Inn, I think. So anyone work with any of those, at any of those companies, or not want to? I see no special exclusions one way or the other. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hand these out. No worries, it's on. I can't remember. Do we want to say anything more on this one? Are we on to the next one? So go ahead, read your case studies, and then hopefully you guys, like this is the BART table up here, so you guys are BART. And so what you're going to do is take a few minutes to both read through those scenarios, those cases, and then we're going to build scenarios using your cards following this model. Actually, I guess we should scoot over because it's
Yeah, you can do that one.
this model. actors, vulnerabilities, target consequences, and the business impact. And, they just
And if
kind of
you
lay it
come
out
up with
like that.
something that you don't have a card for, I've got blank cards, because again, the ontology that we have has got thousands of different objects in it. So if we can build 4,000 scenarios with that deck of cards, imagine what you could do with thousands and thousands and thousands.
So, by the way, time check, we're halfway through. It's 2:45. So the first half we went through this. Because the audience is a little bit smaller, we're going to do one round going around, and we might be out of here early, which I don't think anyone ever is opposed to.
So how are we supposed to identify who the actor is, because we may not have that information?
You're
We
right.
don't remember the case.
Turn to your teammates. So when we do this at CMU, students have gotten it the day beforehand. They have a chance to research a little bit about it. Some of them have some inside knowledge to it. If you don't, if no one at your table does, take your best guess for purposes of the exercise as to who you think that actor was. Or you could look it up. Yeah, there's cheat, because there's no cheating, right? That would not be cheating, right? It's using resources, yes.
So, are we trying to use the card
Have you been?
to create a scenario?
So that's one approach. So yeah, so using those cards to create the scenario as best you understand it and the way the loss happened and that incident.
It's a great class. Yeah. I'm gonna set 15. Did you what you say?
15?
15 minutes to just
Yeah,
get started.
yeah, 15 minutes. We get some water. What's it? Bob. Bob asked a great question up here we forgot to share, which was, why are there impact numbers up on the cards? And that is because Joel and his son really wanted to gamify it with a score. We spent a lot of time going back and forth with this one. And that's, if you remember the picture where they were actually playing the game. So in one version of this, there's like a dice and chips that you can put down. And I was like, that's going to make it too hard. So what we have here is the impact that you can roughly add those together to see how much of an impact, how impactful would that scenario be. And we've removed the dollar point on that one. What we go to after this exercise is we'll show you how to put dollars back into it.
Yeah,
And so
that's for
what's
playing it as a game. You can ignore the. Should have mentioned that. Yep. All right.
Okay, time is up. What we're going to do now, and you know, every time we go through this exercise and we let people go, we never really have hit a point where people say, okay, we're done, right? What else? I mean, people get into the conversations and
that's the whole purpose of this.
the whole point is we're having
Right?
a
There
risk
are no
conversation.
conclusions at this point.
Those decks are for you to keep and take them to the bars tonight. We're not done, by the way. We got 45 more minutes.
Because everybody else pays $10 a pop for these decks, by the way.
But they, especially at this conference, they work great. You sit down at the happy hour or the bar and you just pull the deck out and you start playing the game. You start building scenarios. People come over and say, "Huh, what's that? How's it?" And you're like, "Yeah, that's how it works." You can turn it into a drinking game. Like, I'm going to lay out a scenario. Oh, I had to deal with that one once. Take a drink, because you would have to drink after you. I like that.
Yeah.
I like a memory game. So,
Cards Against Security.
what is it? Cards against security. Oh, trademark that one quick.
Kind of inspired the deck design, by the way. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to just go around and collect maybe one scenario that you built, right? So some people built one scenario, some people built branching scenarios and multiple scenarios. Some people just laid a big grid out and just went like this, right? Because that is some of the discovery that we'll talk about. We actually do that programmatically. What we want to do is pick out probably your best scenario, or the one that you think was the primary scenario in the situation. We're going to write it down, and what we're going to do is we're going to build an ontology of objects here. right? So we're just going to start right up here at the front. What was your
We have LabCorp.
Yeah, so if
LabCorp?
you can say LabCorp and like 1 or 2 sentences, what it was, because not everyone else knows what your incident was.
So LabCorp was a ransomware SAM attack that was perpetuated over an open RDP port to the internet. Something that happens way too often.
Way
Right.
too often.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll probably see this scenario in some of these other
Yeah.
ones. So what was the primary actor?
We think it was nation state
Okay.
based on SAM.
And the
You're
vulnerability
looking at me
then?
like I know the answers. I don't. So.
You can make it back. Yeah, of course, guys.
Yeah.
Vulnerability was bypassed.
And you'll have to
Used,
forgive
brute
me.
force to get in.
All right.
Target was endpoint server.
All right.
Consequence was availability. And risks were operational, legal, capital, and reputation.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you. So let's go back to the next group. And were you a group of 4 or 2? 2? Which one was yours?
We had Under Armour,
Okay.
and for Under Armour, 150 million user data was stolen. There was a data breach of their food and nutrition app, Automatic Fitness app. It did not impact any payment information, but usernames, email addresses, and some hashed passwords, 150 million hashed passwords were stolen. And out of those hashed passwords, some of the passwords were not encrypted appropriately, and they were using the 160-bit hashing function, SHA-1.
So pick one of your objects or the object that we think was behind all this.
So from an actor perspective,
Yeah.
we had either hacktivist or organized crime.
Okay.
It seemed to be too big for an individual. They're working out of their basement. But, you know, with the 3 options there, it was hard to pick just one.
All right. And the vulnerability then on that one? And you got all the green cards laid out there, so just maybe just pick one.
Because we couldn't find information on it. I mean, ultimately, somebody did gain in privileges to access the data.
Yeah,
So could be any which way, but they accessed.
unauthorized, either unauthorized technology or unauthorized physical access.
Okay.
We have about 8.
Yeah, let's do gain. Yep. Gain privileges, and then the target. It was a mobile app, but I suspect that they didn't come through the mobile app. They were probably around the backside. So, what target are we looking at? Customer data.
Yeah.
Probably likely.
Or private electronic information. They're very close.
All right.
And they probably didn't even know what they were looking for until they found that. They said, "Oh, this
Yep.
is good."
This is interesting. Exactly. Their target of opportunity.
So then our consequence for this one,
Confidential.
confidentiality, big one. So this one, we'll get one of those. It's really hard. Anybody, before we get into this, anybody identify an integrity consequence? Awesome.
Oh, good.
Awesome. We'll get to you.
Sure.
And then, so the impact of that,
I thought the 2 highest were reputational and legal and compliance, but we also, of course, have capital or liquidity, depending upon how.
I mean, the
much they were getting.
shares crashed,
yeah.
liquidity or capital.
Right.
Okay. Awesome. You guys.
We had the Panera
All right.
in 2017. Panera was notified by a researcher, Dylan Houlihan, that all the customer records on the website of any customer who had ever ordered from Panera had their customer information and credit card information was all available on the website. They failed to do anything about it. They thought it was a scam until next April.
if they were going through an M&A function or activity at the time, yeah, I would imagine a liquidity there. All right. Next, you guys.
So we had Uber.
Uber.
So during the Uber attack, 7 million Uber customers, their inside or their private information has been have been accessed outside. So their breach involved 600,000 drivers, and ended up paying $100,000 for proof of destroying that data. No credit card information was taken. So basically, you have private, non-public information being exfiltrated from Uber, and they paid a small, large amount of money to get some sort of proof. So in our scenario, we believe that a malicious insider caused this. There was evidence that one of the engineers had put account credentials up on GitHub, and so we think that they were picked up from organized crime group, which initiated the attack to gain additional privileges inside of Uber. They were targeting private information, customer records. The consequence was breach of confidentiality and risk legal compliance, because during the attack, Uber never actually reported it. The attack happened in 2016. It was closer to 2017 when it was actually reported. And Uber took their reputational hit as a result.
So the malicious insider posting stuff up on GitHub, what vulnerability do you think enabled that?
So
Training, carelessness? What cards do you have there to work with? We don't have all the cards again in the deck, but
So
improper
training.
training.
I thought it was malicious then.
Right, if it was intentional, maybe it's something around data exfil,
Yeah.
DLP.
So we don't know, but
The value of this whole process, by the way, is that there is not one definitive right answer. And what happens is, and we get to this in a minute, the algorithm behind this looks at the probability of tracing those different paths, and then a normal distribution, it approaches the more likely scenarios when it runs through a lot of simulation models. And so what we did in each one of these is just one simulation.
What about organizations' inability to identify insider threat?
right, that would have been insider threat, insufficient insider threat processes, and our ontology assumes for process failures also, not just technical failures, human failures, more difficult to get metrics off, but it's possible. All right, let's go really quick. Let's just go through the objects in the scenario. What was the case you had? BART.
Transport organization. We believe it may have been an organized crime group or a hacktivist group placing malware on their servers, asking for ransom. We do know that the hacktivist group may not be exactly looking for ransom, but disruption. That's the goal.
It's always good to make a little coin when you're making some mischief too, right? Yeah.
Vulnerability unknown, maybe any of encryption error, any privileges bypassed.
Okay.
On those three, there's also some element of defacement. Why? Because the payment station went blank. So if you are a provider, wouldn't see it operating. Then I believe. There's some debate as to what the target would be. We agree that the endpoints, workstation laptops, were blank. Debate is based on whether critical infrastructure was affected or not. And the one line of thought here is that things didn't grind to a halt. BART was still able to operate as long as they didn't charge.
It was a payment system.
Yeah, it's just a payment system. So the micros didn't stop running. Everything was still operating. It's just the payment that stopped. The organization was asked for $73,000 to recover this. They decided not to pay, and it cost them $200,000 Other risks were to reputation, of course, legal compliance, I would love to be in that meeting, and liquidity to some extent.
All right. Second table here. What case did you guys have?
This Deloitte.
Deloitte.
Basically, Deloitte had a breach of its internal email system. An administrator account was how they got in. They eventually got all admin accounts compromised. Deloitte must have known something because in 2016 they did a forced reset on their system. It was not protected with two-factor authentication, and then in 2018 they notified 6 of their clients that there was a breach. Turns out there's probably hundreds of clients that were breached. So we think probably organized crime. They're a large financial institution. With regards to the vulnerability, it's unclear. Like their intent clearly was to gain privileges as a launching. Could have been phishing or some other way to actually get in, get that admin account. Likely customer records, and the scenario that we played out is that with access to all of that client information, they could actually, organized crime, manipulate some of the information, and there's your integrity, right? They had manipulated that, and they could actually gain financially from buying and selling stock using that type of information. So risk to confidentiality and integrity, consequence to confidentiality and integrity, and risks clearly to legal compliance. They've already had to hire a firm to investigate and respond. Reputation's gonna take a hit from that.
Yeah.
And their capital can take a hit. Their brand is that they protect the money.
Yep. All right. Do you guys want to go, or do we want to just move on? Got anything to share?
I don't think there's anything unique. It was another situation where we had malware, so they're not patched up.
Yeah.
Malware, ransomware.
So what we're finding is that there's not a lot, right? There's not a lot of differences that happen out there. There's a little bit of flavors. Thank you so much. There's a little bit of flavors, and we're just going to move on in the interest of time.
Just to briefly, because to be fair for everyone, so which group was yours?
So FedEx.
You were FedEx. Do you have anything more you'd want to add? Looking at your cards and your scenarios, did you plug any scenarios that aren't tagged?
The only thing that we really picked was our target was more of the, and this is maybe an critical infrastructure because it went after and encrypted basically all of their servers.
Okay, yeah, so let's go ahead and read off your actors, and we can add those in.
So suspected because of the ransomware organized crime.
Organized crime, okay.
It came out of Ukraine, which was, we believe, attack software that was updated with it included.
Okay.
So our vulnerability was unauthorized technology in the organization.
Okay.
Which targeted the critical infrastructure being their shipping-related infrastructure services, which impacted, as a consequence of availability, they were not able to process their packaging. And that resulted in pretty much all the risks we talked about: operational, reputational, potential legal compliance, and they took a huge material write-down as a result. So liquidity and capital level.
Excellent. And I see that, so right behind you guys also had FedEx. Anything that?
The difference on ours was we thought it might be nation state based on the Ukraine-Russian situation over there, but not sure.
NATO thinks it was a Russian cyber attack, so there was a report from NATO that said it was NATO.
And cyber insurers are not covering it because it's an act of war. We learned that yesterday.
Right, exactly. And so Rama was lone wolf in the back. Which one did you have?
Oh no, so we worked together and then we left. These guys left. So operational on the far right seemed to be an impact as well. And availability we agreed that was good, but the vulnerability we felt was a process breakdown. That was one of the green cards because truth be told,
It was a process. Perfect. Yeah, the process.
assuming there was an overarching policy that said, or some sort of a guideline that said X number of attempts and you lock something down because this was brute force, so something like that could have been prevented.
Excellent. Appreciate you staying here to represent the rest of your group. Which use case did you have?
Oh, it was LabCorp.
With LabCorp.
LabCorp.
Okay. So let's pop on to the next slide and we can show the algorithm on this too.
Yeah. So we had a question. What do we?
Thank you for that. It always takes a while to go through, but
Yeah. What do we do with all this now, right? So what we learned was a lot of clustering, right? A lot of scenarios, a lot of incidents cross over. They reuse objects. We had a lot around here looking at customer records, which we would expect, gaining privileges, right? The usual suspects. So what we can do from that is discover and learn other scenarios and learn new things. So imagine that we take these cards, right, and we lay them out in a big grid. We take the 51 cards that we have, or the 1,000 that are in the ontology that we developed, and we assign just a couple metrics. Doesn't take a lot. You just assign a little bit of nervousness to each of these objects. And what we're able to find out is if we start lighting them up, or if we build the patterns that we know to link scenarios, right? These are scenarios I know I'm looking for. And we add a little bit of automation, add a little bit of metrics to these, light up the ones that I might be worried about. We're able to identify the scenarios that are more likely to happen in an organization and drop the other ones away, right? So we can focus on, if I were to take this object out, this chain, whatever controls I would need to apply to that, right? And then you look at the metrics that are going sideways, you could eliminate 2 potential reds, really batty ones, right? So that's what we'll do. That's something that you can do with your kids if you want to gamify this. We were talking about gamifying this with kids and getting them to think about this. Lay the cards out, throw jacks or grains of rice or plastic ants, and see which ones have the most objects on them, right? Which ones are attracting the most bad stuff? And then start talking like, well, I see in here, this is the chain that I'm most worried about. Drag all the other ones away. Let's focus on that one today. How would we fix that? That's a really good thing to do with your kids. It's a great thing to do with training. It's a great way to just introduce the swarm algorithm, which is what we're looking at here, to someone who doesn't do mathematics, liberal arts guy.
so to expand on that. So Joel used an important word that we haven't introduced a whole lot here, but it's critical to the way the algorithm works, and that's nervousness. Nervousness comes directly from ants, and a lot of this is based in ant-based routing, like biological ants using pheromones. They have a reaction when they see something that stimulates in their environment. In our case, we're reacting because we see something from our threat intelligence or monitoring our systems that makes us more worried about organized crime or worried about authentication bypass. Those different objects, as we see those indicators, either from our SIM tools, or our logging tools, or threat intelligence information, that highlights those as red. And that's how those start to go out. So if we were to say that we wanted to metric the nervousness of the group in this room, have to suspend what we know of our cases for a minute, because in practical application it doesn't mean anything other than these are the things that as a collective this group is most concerned about looking at our scenarios. Our nervous elements are just who use those elements the most. So we have the most on organized crime, gaining privileges, focusing on customer data records for a loss of confidentiality. And then if we look through these impacts, you've got 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 5. Put legal and compliance even together, and we're at 5, right? So our scenario ends up looking like that. And so does that mean a scenario? In real life, it means a scenario like of the collective group in this room. If we were a swarm of ants, that's kind of what we're most nervous about. And then we could, if we need to have a common conversation around organized crime gaining privilege, that could be a topic that this group would have. Now, imagine if you take it back to your organization and you go through these different create scenarios in your organization, you've now identified the scenarios that you might want to talk about specific within your organization with your colleagues.
Or you could just do this.
This is the real reason Joel got the overhead doc cam. It's really bad.
Okay.
Now you'll have my engineer.
Yeah. All right. So go ahead.
Sorry, aren't your scenarios designed to, I mean, again, I realize these are real life, but aren't they designed to lead you to that pathway?
Not necessarily, no. Because those are scenarios, and this is more to the Carnegie Mellon context, those scenarios, if we were to make this better, maybe we would make them specific, but those are the scenarios that the students in the CMU class use for their exercises through their 6-month program. And so those are fixed, and we're just applying this to the particular components as opposed to coming in and saying, well, we decide that it's an internal actor or something like that. So it's a possible improvement, right? Actually, I haven't gotten that feedback before of tuning the scenarios so it's easier to pull out the scenario. So that's a good idea. But no, it's not designed that way.
Yeah, sorry.
Hey,
Yeah.
free deck of cards.
As I'm looking at it, there's, over to your afters, there weren't any scenarios I heard that sounded likely to be a malicious insider or, so I mean, if that's what if there's nothing in your scenarios that's gonna lead you toward malicious insider, you're biased to not having malicious insider.
Right, for exactly, for the sample size of this room.
Sure.
That's right. Yep, exactly right.
So let's talk really briefly on impact, because we got asked, what do I do with this, and where do I take this?
15 minutes.
Yep, perfect
More or
time.
less,
So we'll talk a little bit. This is the math stuff. I'm going to let him do that.
Are we doing slides and then we'll show the visual?
Yep.
Okay. So go ahead to the next slide. So the concept that we use here is called calibrated estimation from Doug Hubbard's books, How to Measure Anything, and so specifically applying it to information security risk. It's actually one of the required readings for the CMU program. Have any of you read the book before? I'm getting some nods, yes, so it might even be in the bookstore, I don't know. Go ahead and advance to the next one because I don't remember what I'm supposed to say on this one. So one of the things that's introduced in there is this idea of a loss exceedance curve. So much we think of that stoplight chart, red, yellow, green, that Joel had mentioned earlier as a way to try to look at risk, but that's too discrete because the risk is a dynamic, it's a continuum. And so the shift that's come out of the insurance sector and now making its way through other hard to measure areas like cybersecurity is to use a loss exceedance approach, meaning this is how much I'm willing to lose and the likelihood that it'll actually happen. So on one end of the spectrum, I know that this particular incident, this bad thing, it's 100% likely that it'll happen. Somebody forgetting their password, right? And that'll impact us at $100,000. That's the cost of doing business. On the other end of the spectrum, the life-ending, career-ending event is something that would cost us $55 million. The curve of that line describes the risk appetite to that particular scenario, to that particular loss. And so in this case where it shows a steep drop-off, it means that we're more willing to take losses that are less expensive, less willing to take losses that are more expensive. A more aggressive risk-taking posture, this bulge would be out here, and we'd be more willing to take losses further out. And it lets us have that risk conversation rather than just a red, yellow, green.
Yeah, so appetite is your acceptance, and then the question is, how do we tell the future? How do we know what's going to happen? And so that's when we get into the projection, which is the actual probability.
Right, and so this is where the scenarios come in, building all those scenarios and all those elements out, because we can then say, if that scenario happened in my environment, how much do I think it would cost me? A guess is good enough, because then with that guess, you can calibrate it by saying, with a 50% confidence interval or a 90% confidence interval. But as long as you have enough of those data points, the normal distribution means that you start to get pretty close to what you think it's actually going to look like. And then that's why we run it through these simulations. So we're able to build a curve to say these scenarios, if they happen in your environment, are likely to impact you along the curve. The appetite describes how much you're willing to take, and then those areas where the simulation, the scenarios, what we just built with our card deck, exceeds our acceptable appetite, that's where we have a problem. And those, it gives the more specific elements as to what we'd want to go after.
So the dotted line, it's probably hard to read. The dotted line here is the appetite curve that we drew. How much do I want to risk? And then the blue line is the result of running thousands of automated, or even a handful of automated scenarios based on metrics to say, probabilistically speaking, this is the shape of the future. As is, right. And so then
Right.
programmatically you can add controls and say, if I bring the nervousness, I'll just show you.
For $9.99, you can change your risk curve, but
Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly right. And then you can have a conversation where you say, well, I don't want to spend that much money. I don't want that type of incident to happen. You say, okay, so we need to put more money towards it because right now we're okay taking that amount of risk. So the conversation you hit at the executive level is, this is how much risk we're willing to take. This is how much we're actually taking. Anything that's in the red is bad. Anything that's green is good. If you want less red, we either need to reduce what we're doing for risky taking activity, so to bring this curve below there, or we need to increase the money that we're spending on controls to allow us to take more risk to bring it up here.
So this is actually not a bad picture. What we usually see in the system is the reverse, where you have green in the lower end, where you're like, well, I'm okay, those are going to happen. And then you have a scenario way out here in the red saying, yeah, there's a 20% chance or lower, but it's going to be $8 billion.
And I should say, this is intentionally not ever meant to be a vendor pitch. So what this is just the AI system that we built at Emergynt to take the algorithm we described and put it in a tool that lets you do risk modeling, risk simulations to identify the future possible incidents of what could happen. And so that's how a risk organization can start looking at the possible bad things that could happen rather than just being reactionary to the incidents that show up.
Just to put it in view.
Well, can we show the single scenario
Sure.
one?
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
I like that one too. So let's just show that so you can kind of see the application of it as well. So on one hand, we're looking at it across many different types of loss scenarios, and you can apply those to a business unit, or we can drill into just one scenario. And in this case, the scenario is a system administrator injects malicious technology going after customer records.
Make it bigger.
And so based off of the metrics that we're able to pull in, the different data sources, we can separate it out by different types of business units. And what it shows here is that we have, at one standpoint, 100% likelihood that we would have a $10,000 loss if that particular scenario takes place across those different components. And then as we move out, there's this is how much we will accept it. So we are accepting of a $100,000 loss. But as we move out, we're saying, for example, IT operations, we're only willing to accept, IT operations is down here, so actually let's pick on the blue one, investments. At 37, we're only willing to accept 37% of those incidents that'll hit us at $50,000.
Sorry, maybe I'm missing this. You're definitely showing the probability of taking a specific financial hit given a specific scenario.
Yes.
But have you factored the probability of the scenario?
So this is an important assumption that we made, is that because threat actors have become sophisticated enough, we make an assumption that if a threat actor chooses to go after us with this, if they come after it, that it'll be sophisticated enough to happen. So we remove that whole probabilistic side of will it happen, and instead we say that we know threat actors are going to try to make it happen. We want to know from a simulation standpoint, at what level are we still accepting of that risk or not?
But what we do when we talked about those metrics earlier with the cards, like if I want to look at this object, this card that's represented by this card, what metrics would expose me to the scenario? We do ask the nervousness. So we say, I'm very nervous right up here. We have a couple different models in here, but if we just look at this one, there's a 39% exposure to this scenario. So it's not saying that this scenario will occur, but you can line up, if we look at all the different scenarios and say which are the scenarios that are the most exposed. Those are the ones I want to go after
The ones
first, because
exposed, the
those
ones
are the
that we
ones
should
that
be
have
the most worried about.
most scary cards, most nervousness. So for example, this one here, organized crime game installs crypto miner. And we can drill in further to see what are the objects that get exposed by this. Here's our actor, our vulnerability, our target, our consequence, just like the cards. And then what are the metrics underneath that? Why am I so nervous about cloud right now. So you can open it up and say, here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 metrics that I'm looking at to understand, am I nervous about cloud? I'm really nervous about this one here, percent of servers with non-SMS two-factor enabled, and where are my business units? So my retail business unit is very nervous because they don't have that turned on at all, and my investments group. I need to, if I'm worried about this scenario happening, I need to go to my retail and my investment group and turn on two-factor.
Right. So if we rewind back, we want to shift our mindset. This is the mindset shift. So instead of saying will or will the scenario not happen, we're saying it's probably going to happen, but am I okay with it? And is it accepting? So how much will it hurt me if it does? And that's what we're trying to answer here is, are you okay with that as a risk manager? So kind of back to one of the original points that you had is we've got a $10 million opportunity to release this new product onto the market, but we've got scenarios that say that we could have a $2 million loss if we do it in the way that we've structured it so far. Are we okay with a $10 million gain for a $2 million risk? Now we can put that in business language, and it's not just the InfoSec folks taking that risk on, but it's a business decision that's made.
Question. I understand changing the mindset, but where is the likelihood and consequence coming into play? Where all the doctrine, NIST, all that kind of stuff, you've got to identify and quote play with.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that come into?
Yeah, so it's a solid question. The likelihood piece of it, because that one's tricky and hard to do, we skipped that one. We're not answering that part to say the likelihood of that scenario happening. We're saying if the scenario is going to take place, this is how much it's going to impact you, as opposed to trying to figure out is it or is it not going to take place. Because there's actually a number of models already that can look at that and say, well, based on a time of year and things like that, is this scenario likely to take place? But that's not part of what we're trying to address. We're trying to say, based on the immediate indicators right now, should you be nervous about that scenario happening? So it is a shift from the traditional risk model of saying likelihood that it'll happen. And so if I were to take a harder stance, I'd say, show me any good, crystal ball that can predict the future and tell me likelihood of something actually happening. We haven't been very good at that.
Probability of a 100-year flood is 101, except it's been happening in the last.
Quite a bit
Which
more.
happened within 2 years just down the road from me in Baltimore. Yeah.
Probability of any, organized crime, most organizations, probability of being hit by organized crime, unless you're a major bank or,
Yeah.
you would probably not expect it, but gosh darn it, happens all the time. I like how it reframes the conversation with leadership to say, let's not talk about these probabilities in a way that we can reduce the probabilities from happening from a probability standpoint, but really identify the risk, and are we prepared to take these things on when they happen?
Right. Thank you for putting it that way.
Fair, and
Yep.
to take that,
Mm-hmm.
I would do 6-week assessments with firms, and going out there, doing that 6-week assessment, we'd spend 3 weeks just talking about profitability, and we would never get consensus about it.
Yeah. Fair is a fantastic, so for an example, fair is a fantastic model when you've identified that scenario that you want to dig super duper deep in. This is the assessment of the oil field. Looking at a satellite image and going, where might I find oil? I want to go there, and then you bring out your fair model, and then you go super deep.
Yeah.
That's the problem with fair, though.
Yeah.
You're not the first or the 10th or the 100th person to say that. So we're
Yeah, we
part
showed
of
this
Fair
to Jack,
Institute.
and he's
It's
like, yeah,
compatible with
that's-
Fair. We tag it to Fair, and even Jack Johnson and I've had Jack Jones and I have had this discussion, and then also even some of the folks at B of A that have looked at this as well. Is Fair is going to let you take a single scenario and go deep to get a good quantified analysis of how much it's going to cost. This one lets you look at very broad to say, okay, well, what are the loss
out
scenarios I'm worried about? And you can find the ones that used to start chaining together and now do a fair analysis on just those scenarios.
So then this is the rehearsed ending. So we charge you as you leave today
Yeah.
to find. So
Is that the? Oh, yeah, there we go.
to find opportunities to, again, change your position, identify where are you playing in the game, what's the mindset of your organization, right? What are they, where do you play from a reporting standpoint, but also from a role? Look at changing their mindset. Start introducing these concepts and these thoughts. I'm happy, since we didn't have a ton of people show up, I'm happy to give you all an extra set of cards so you can then pass this on, right? It's going to cost you $10 on top of that.
That's the difference between give and $10.
Given $10, yeah. And then change that conversation, right? There's not a lot of revolutionary stuff happening, right? But when you start putting them together and you start thinking a little bit differently and you automate it and you put creative minds behind it, we learn something every time we do one of these sessions. Somebody points something and puts something together, and that's just out of having conversation. So it's getting your heads a little bit out of the data, out of the PowerPoints, and having that communication, clear and concise, frank communication with your colleagues, your boards, and your kids.
I think you should also remarket this for incident response. Like, I think you should take this and say this is your incident
And it'll be
response.
$25 a pack.
I love that idea. So
Not Fs.
I did this at a workshop at the City of Austin where they brought their IT team in, and it was much less technical than the group is here, but even there they were like, we need to figure out how to market this to kids for cyberbullying. So I think there are a lot of applications like incident response, cyberbullying, executive metrics, things like that. Would love to get feedback and suggestions. I'm not going to charge you for an extra deck. If you want to grab an extra deck, come on up.
No, I said three decks is an extra.
I'd love to,
He just doesn't want to carry 'em home.
hire people and just like randomly throw, one card from each area out and say,
I had a customer that did exactly that for their tabletop training. They got the engineers in together, and they was part of their security awareness training as well. And they're like, look, here's the cards. Here's what we're dealing with. Right. Some people have used it to build those tabletops and then go do their DR recovery or their incidents from there. Oh, thank you, Robert. Yeah, so we have a handout, and think we also posted this up, of like a how-to guide of using the deck. You now sat through 2 hours of training on the deck. Please go back, share it. I'd love to hear stories about how you were able to use it internally with your IR teams. That sounds like a great idea as well. And if anyone wants to dig in deeper to the AI tool that then automates all this, we're happy to talk about that as well.
And I hear the guy that collated.
Great collation. So thank you everybody for the time.